In this video, we're going to cover a few pieces of terminology that are going to be used in application problems, also known as word problems in this. If you know what these words are, then they just turn the problems into solving right triangles, which we learned how to do that in the earlier video. But if you don't know these terminology, then you basically have no way to even start the problem. Okay, so the first thing is something called angle of elevation. And so the idea is that if you are looking straight ahead and you have to look up at some angle in order to see something, then whatever angle here is called the angle of elevation. A common example might be you have a building and you are standing next to the building. This is my artistic ability here. If you look straight ahead, you might be looking at like this way. And if you want to turn your head up in order to see the top of the building, then whatever angle you would measure right here, that is called the angle of elevation. So whenever you're looking at a word problem that's talking about angle of elevation, you want to draw a picture like this. You want to draw a straight out horizontal line from whatever your starting point is, and then you draw the angle they tell you going upwards from that starting horizontal line. The angle of depression is very similar. You have this thing you're looking like straight out, but this time you go downwards, essentially like a negative angle, and that angle would be the angle of depression. So once again, an example might be is you're on top of a building now, and if you were to look straight out, you look at that, but what if you have a shorter building over here and you say how much do you have to tilt your head down in order to see the edge of that second building? That angle there is what we call the angle of depression. So angle of elevation, angle of depression are basically the same thing, but versus positive versus negative. You draw your straight horizontal line out, and then you either go up or down the angle depending on if it's elevation or depression, and that's what they're talking about in these problems. The last piece of terminology is a little bit more complicated. It's called bearing. It's the bearing or the direction you are traveling in. It's used in like planes and boats and things like this. We don't really use it so much with like traveling in cars. We just say, travel on this street or this freeway. But if you're looking at cardinal directions, north, east, south, and west, if you're traveling straight east, you can just say travel straight east. If you're traveling straight north, you can just say travel straight north. But what if you are traveling in some direction over here? Something like this. Well, we need some way to describe it. And yes, we've already learned a way using x and y axes and measuring the angle from the positive x-axis and so on to decide what angle that might be. But it turns out bearing is not used in that fashion. It's kind of unfortunate that it's not used that, but it's a system that's been in place for a very long time, so we have to kind of learn it. So let's suppose that this angle here, just for sake of argument, was 30 degrees. We would describe this direction as north 30 degrees towards east. So when we see n 30 degrees east, that means face north, face straight north, then turn 30 degrees in the eastward direction, and that is the correct bearing for north 30 east. If you wanted to have something, say, down here, and let's say this angle at the bottom is 40 degrees, then this bearing, so we always start with either north or south, so this time we start with south, and it says turn 40 degrees in the eastern direction. So you always start with north or south here, then you say how much do you turn in either the east or west direction. If I wanted to go over, say over here at, a 10 degree angle, this would be south 10 degrees west. And so it's important to understand this notation, this terminology, whenever you have a problem involving bearing. And those are a pretty common word problem in a trigonometry class, because we'll talk about planes going at certain bearings, we'll talk about boats going at certain bearings. We might say you're heading at a certain bearing, but then you go off course, and how far off course are you going to be? Things like this are common problems in this course, and so you want to understand this notation of what bearing even means.